The Sine Institute of Policy and Politics is American University's incubator for policy innovation. We convene leaders in the academic, public, private, nonprofit, and journalism sectors to engage and promote common ground and nonpartisan solutions. In an evolving world, we seize the opportunity to work on the nation's most pressing challenges through collaboration by experts and top scholars in their field with students in research and scholarship. As part of that goal, the Sine Institute leverages American University's location in our nation's capital, the nexus of government and a growing international business center. We connect diverse perspectives from around the country and around the world with our world-class academics and research, experienced practitioners, and the most politically active student body in the U.S. We stand apart through our focus on the role of business and the nonprofit community in public policy, the rise of the importance of economic regions in the United States, and international policy issues. Our focus is to make an immediate impact at the intersection of policy and politics that leads to real and lasting change. Thank you for joining us as we convene, communicate, and collaborate. And now introducing 2023 Sine Fellow, Terence Samuel.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for coming here on first a beautiful day, what some consider a slow news day. So it's great. We're going to be talking about careers in journalism. I am so excited that you're here. This is a part of our new program with the Sine Institute called Career Conversations. When we bring in our spring fellows in our spring semester, we are partnering with the AU Alumni Association. Lisa's here with a ton of information. We'll talk a little bit more about ways you can get connected as you are some becoming alumni, will be alumni, how you can use that network. And we also are partnering, we've got some colleagues from the Career Center as well. I will say, because they love me saying it, my very first political job in DC, I got through the Career Center here at AU, because I'm also a proud alum. So right, Career Center, I get a gold star every time I say that. So thank you for coming today. Of course, this is our career conversation with our fellow. It's his last session here on campus, which is hard to believe, although I think he might keep coming.
I was doing so well. And then I got lost on the other side of campus.
But he's here. And as many of you know, you've been to his sessions, but if you have not, Terry is the National Public Radio VP and Executive Editor at National Public Radio. He's had a long history in also local journalism. He is an author of an incredible book that I'm so proud to see him execute on and finish, right, Terry? And as a part of this program, we really wanted to also showcase the amazing talent and alumni that AU has in these areas when we're having these career conversations. We are humbled and proud so much. So Antoine Sanfuentes is here to join us today. He is a proud alum. He is an Eagle graduating from CAS with a bachelor's degree. He's an experienced news media executive and editor recognized for award-winning journalism. I will say that I'm reading this because there's so much incredible things there. I have to say, I was humbled by reading it. But Antoine is currently the vice president and managing editor for CNN's Washington Bureau, where he oversees the White House and Capitol Hill beats. So again, both these gentlemen had a light day. Nothing going on in the news, came to join us. But Antoine, thank you so much for moderating this conversation. We're going to leave plenty of time with questions with all of you. But thank you again for being here, and I leave it to you.
Well, thank you, and thank you, Amy. And I want to recognize Amy Eisman, who's also here with the journalism department, and I'm hugely delighted to be speaking to students there. What a pleasure and an honor to finally meet you and to talk about your experience, and maybe through the lens of my experiences, talk a little bit about maybe what we'll call life lessons, because I imagine you're here to learn something so that it can better inform your professional direction. There's certainly a lot of takeaways from two so-called suits here, the executives, the editors in the newsroom. I think Terry sometimes Terence is referred to as the mediator, which is a very important role. And I realize that when we think about journalism, we think about reporting, reporters, but there is also a very critical role in our business, and that is the role of the editor. Ultimately, they run interference. They help set the tone. They think about stuff in terms of how are we going to say what we're going to say? And how do we make sure that the news organization across the board follows that? Let's think about today, because we're going to get into it. You know, we were kind of joking. There's not a lot going on. There's plenty going on. And I imagine in your newsroom, there's been a great discussion about how to frame the former president's indictment. It's historical, it's important. But we talked for a minute about how to describe, for example, his walk down the hallway, how to refer to it, right?
He's been reading.
But it's important, right? It's awfully important, because that kind of detail is the impartiality that we rely on, so that there's no so-called freelancing in a news organization, right? So that lens is awfully important. So why don't we start in New York, because you spent some time there. Give me, why don't you talk to us a little bit about the day and your perspective?
So I think a lot of what you heard reflected here is, so we know what's going on today. And I will tell you, the fact that he is here today means that he's a big shot, because even though he's in charge of it, it's happening a little bit without it. So thanks for that. So, I mean, in some ways, you know, the thing happening in New York today, a former president of the United States, criminally charged, arraigned, enters a plea, fingerprinted, photographed, and just enormous, huge, big deal. And it's, on some level, we kind of saw it coming. And so we've been planning for it, and we've been preparing for it. In the last few days, when we kind of knew it was happening, there were a lot of plans about how we were going to do it and where we're going to do it. And don't take this personally. I have some TV people in my ranks, and all they wanted to talk about is, how are we going to do the perp walk? How are we going to do the perp walk? The perp walk, if you were reporting in New York City, meant, because the DA and the cops would do this for you. They were doing this for you. They would arraign the suspect, and then they would walk him or her out so that you can see it, so you can get pictures. And if you were the tabloids, you would have like great pictures of the suspect. And it was called a perp walk. And that was a lot of the discussion yesterday morning. And I said, okay, we are not ever going to refer to the former president's event as a perp walk. And we're going to be very careful about how we do this. Which turned into me actually going on the radio and talking about it, which I never do. But to be a reporter in New York City is like the most amazing thing you can imagine. And a lot of what I said yesterday was just going back to that. And so what we're looking at is all this historic stuff that we just talked about. But in fact, it's just another New York City arraignment of 100 Center Street. And for those of us who've been there, it's like, oh, this is great. And it's the big story and all of that. But I've spent so much time thinking about how we do that and who we're supposed to serve and how we're supposed to approach these stories, that yesterday and today turned me into this kind of boring old guy saying, let's not do this and let's not do that and let's not do this other thing. At the heart of that, though, is, and some of you have been to some of these other things, who are we doing this for? we're doing it for regular people who need to figure out why this is important, how it's important, how it's important in ways that the political class and the partisan class would like you to believe, but it's not. And so we have to work really hard to cut through to get to the important thing here. And what I said to our anchor yesterday is, it's a big story. It's an interesting story. It's a consequential story, and the thing we're going to focus on is the consequential. And so that's what we're doing, I hope. It's driving me crazy, though, that everybody else has the indictment and we don't have it yet. You guys have it. You should be happy.
I think by the end of this session, we'll be fine.
I hope we have it before that.
But in framing is important.
Framing is absolutely important. I mean, the thing I think I wanted to talk about is this. It's this contradictory thing, right? Where I say the important thing is the audience. Pay attention to them. The story is about them. And on the other hand, the way to do this work is to figure out what you're good at, what you're interested in, and how those two things mesh. And it takes, I think, a long while to figure that out, especially in newsrooms where everybody's yelling at you and telling you to do this and telling you to do that, and sometimes often telling you to do things that don't make any sense because we're talking to you because we were born 50 years before you were, or 30 years, whatever. But the great thing about this stuff is he works at CNN, I work at NPR, I used to work at the Washington Post, these big monster organizations. The essence of these places are people who are really good at what they do, and think about how their kind of personal skill and interest, concern, integrity figures into how we cover stories, how we do this work.
Let me take you back. I mean, you can clearly see there's a serious passion here for storytelling and serving the audience. How did you get into this? I read about your amazing background and how you made the journey from the Caribbean here to the United States, wide-eyed and fascinated by what happens here. You wrote a book about the Senate. You dug deep in terms of, becoming absolutely fascinated by the machinations of the Senate. You were even saved by a senator in Montana, where you were stuck in the snow.
He's done the reading.
But this is important because when you find your passion, you become relentless. And I'm curious about how you got into this business and what has sustained you this whole time.
So I went to the library once when I was, I don't know, maybe 14, maybe younger. And I checked out 2 books. I was like, wow, you could do that? They'll just let you take the books? Cool. This is in Trinidad. It was the Hardy Boys. Number 19, The Disappearing Floor. I don't remember what the second one was, but I read them both very quickly. And I mean, these are like white kids living in suburban somewhere, living on literally Elm Street. But great stories. And I was like, so I went back and I got more and I got more. And I suddenly realized that there's this world that was out there and different. And I wouldn't say I had discovered storytelling at that point, but I had discovered that that can have an effect on me. And so as I go along, I get to college and I'm doing by now I'm in New York and I'm doing the immigrant thing, which is you have to be an engineer, a lawyer, a doctor. I mean, you guys know how this is, right? When I told my mother that I was switching from engineering to English and journalism, she said the most immigrant mother thing anybody could say, which was, can't you do both? But I was an engineering major and I took the 300 level organic chemistry course. You guys may have heard this story. And and you know how they say failure is feedback? Well, I failed. But it was clear to me that there was something going on. And it went back to that, like that idea that you could read something, and I didn't know at this point, or you could write something and have this kind of enormous effect on people. And so I switched to journalism, and I didn't know enough to like, I was scrambling around. And that is not a bad thing. Scrambling around is the thing. At some point, I realized that being able to tell other people's stories can somehow concentrate your own sense of what your story is. And once you have that, the world gets really interesting. So in my junior year, my girlfriend broke up with me. And so I was like, shit. It's like May. It's like, don't do this. Do not try this at home. Do not try to get a summer internship in May. I went to the career office and the woman looked at me like, are you nuts? She's like, we only have 2 things left. I forgot what the other thing was, but the other one was a writing fellowship at the Village Voice. I applied for it. I didn't think I was going to get it. I got a summer job at St. Clair's Hospital in New York. We won't talk about how long ago it was, but let me just say $265 a week back then was a lot of money. And I worked for like 3 weeks, and then the Voice called and said, hey, do you want to do this internship? It's $100 a week. And I didn't have any trouble deciding, which is interesting because money was really important to me then. But I went to the Village Voice, and everything that's happened since then was because of that. That's how I got into it.
And do you remember a defining story, something that you were unleashed to chase down that was that really got you hooked into journalism?
There are probably several. At the Voice, there was a big air traffic controller strike. And the president of the United States then, one Ronald Reagan, had said, we don't need you guys. And he fired everybody. And so they were having these like rallies, and like everybody's like, how can you fire the air traffic controllers? Where are the planes going to go? But he did, and it changed everything. But they kept having these rallies, And so I went to one and I wrote about it. And there was a quote in the story where I wrote about a supervisor who got fired, not because he was on strike, but because he went to one of these strike rallies. And I was quoting somebody in the rally. And yeah, these guys just got fired and they're like mad. And it's like, and the quote was, Reagan can go fuck himself. And I did what I learned in J school. Reagan can go F dash dash. And my editor, who wasn't really my editor, but kind of a mentor, Uber mentor, his name was Nat Hentoff, a legend, said, what did he say? I said, he said Reagan can go fuck himself. He's like, well, why don't you write that? And that was like, oh, we should just tell people what happened? Okay. So there was that. I got out of college and I interned at the Philadelphia Daily News. I got to write the little notices about things that were happening in town. Like, here's what's happening in Philadelphia tomorrow. When I write my memoir, it's going to be called Learning to Spell Tomorrow, because I spelled tomorrow wrong. And all the guys in the features department made fun of me. But here's how they made fun of me. Not like, this kid's an idiot, he did something wrong. Or like, hey, look at the New Yorker, he thinks he's like a big shot, he spelled tomorrow wrong. So there's this like making fun of me, but oh, he's a New Yorker. So there's like, okay, a little bit of respect, a lot of disparagement. To this day, I will never spell tomorrow wrong. But part of what I did on that thing was I wrote a thing that said, something to the effect of, so this was a new water taxi on the Delaware River between Philadelphia and Camden. And I wrote something to the effect, I wrote a sentence that said, there's a lot protecting Philadelphia from Camden. And somebody's like, protecting? Where do you get that from? And it was the complete stereotype that Camden was a dump and Philadelphia was something. And I walked right into it with absolutely no basis. And I learned that day that you just didn't bring your biases, in this case, not even biases so much, but ignorance to the work if you didn't do it. So those were a couple. There are a lot more.
You mentioned Nat Hentoff. I only got to talk to him once, and it was about Thelonious Monk, so I never had a chance to talk to him about.
So Nat Hentoff. So this is the thing about. So I told you, I literally, this woman broke up with me, and I went to The Voice, and Nat Hentoff is my editor, and he is a legend. I have no idea what I just walked into. Nat, a few years later, not that many, called me up and we're talking. And he says in the most casual way, why don't you write a book? Oh, because I got a job, I got like all this stuff going on. But he saw me in a completely different way than I saw myself. And pay attention to those people because they are incredibly valuable. Nat was a First Amendment purist. He believed that people should be able to say anything. And even though he worked for The Voice and for years had been this kind of liberal champion, got crossways with liberals because he started saying that they were kind of like policing language, and he didn't go for that. And but that is.
So talk about mentoring and how important that is in one's life.
So you spend a lot of money here at this university. And the idea. I have a real connection with you on this. I have a daughter graduating from WashU in St. Louis at the same time anybody who's a senior here is graduating. So I kind of understand kind of the financial, but the idea is we know things that we are going to transfer to you, and now you will be smart. It really is an elaborate, costly version of mentoring, and literally the thing you have to do, particularly in newsrooms, is kind of find your people who will kind of allow this kind of transfer of knowledge, wisdom. When I was not one of these people who wanted to be a journalist when I was in high school. I didn't work on my high school paper. I made my way back to the college paper after she broke up with me. And she's come up. You know what's weird? Today's her birthday. Oh my God. Moving on. So I got out of college at the City College of New York. I moved to Roanoke, Virginia, which feels like a completely different world. And I'm working in a newsroom, and I'm writing about things that are completely foreign to me. I'm covering Bedford County. And I have editors who are kind of teaching me how to do this. But the people I learned from the most, so I worked with this guy, Tim Orrig, and he was from Texas. He hated being in Virginia. And we would work on stories together, and he was just like the harshest, like toughest critic. We worked on this big story, and I wrote a lead to this day I'm reminded of. Double murder. We don't know who did it yet, but here's what we know. We know like details of the friend who called the cops. So these people get killed. A few days go by, people keep calling. I talked to the friend who eventually called the cops. She kept calling their house. The lead of the story I wrote was, the phone rang unanswered. He's like, what the hell is that? What is that? And like, it took me like forever, but if you find your people, they will beat you up and beat you into shape. And the end of the mentoring story is Les Payne, who worked at Newsday, who gave me the best advice ever about journalism, but I feel like it applies to anything. He said, newsrooms are not built to teach you anything because everybody's too busy, everybody's working really fast. So find your people. And if you see somebody doing something that you like, admire, would like to be able to do yourself, steal it from them. Go sit next to them and watch them do it. Ask them to help you do it. Whatever you do, go get it. But and that's what mentors do. They help you figure out how to do the thing that you want to do.
emulate. It's important. What makes a good story?
What makes a good story? Somebody has something happen to them that you care about, and you want to know how it ends. That's what makes a good story. And if I am writing, I have to figure out what it is that is happening to this person that you care about. And so, I mean, there are elaborate theories, right? What makes a good story is you have to be able to see yourself in the story. Something happens. Somebody wins or somebody loses. I never say this, but I'm going to say it. That was a good question. I think the thing that makes a good story is that you're able to see yourself in it, because that focuses on the audience.
You're probably wondering, what can we learn from these old guys, right? So maybe we ought to dig into that too, in terms of what do we look for in terms of the future, in terms of reporting. When you are hiring, what do you look for in up and coming journalists?
So I think journalism is an act of, like an uber act of citizenship. You have to feel like you're part of something, and you have to be interested and curious about the world. I mean, in terms of skills, people who write well, people who think well, that's a bias. But at the end of the day, you just need to be able to do something really, really well. And you get to choose that. But in terms of like just hiring young reporters, I like people who are interested in something. I mean, it pops out, they're just obsessed about a part of the world or a particular subject, climate. Hip hop, I don't know, whatever it is, you can feel the enthusiasm. And what you're looking for is somebody who is going to be able to go tell these stories that we don't know are stories because we had our turn and now it's theirs.
Yeah. Talk about the landscape. You've talked about this in your talks here at the university about the challenges that this new group here is facing, shrinking newsrooms, the media landscape, tightening of financial belts out there, force reductions, what talk about the challenges, but perhaps that also means an opportunity.
Yeah, I think, I mean, part of the answer is I don't know. But the other part of the answer is I know for sure that the thing that we do, the stories that we tell, the reason people are interested is because they want to connect to their communities, they want to connect to the larger world, and they want to be able to see themselves reflected in that. That's not going to ever change or ever go away. And the way we tell those stories, whether it's on TV or in books or on the radio or on Instagram, or whatever comes next. That essence of good storytelling, I think you guys are going to be able to like figure it out. And I mean, look, you know, the business models that are failing, the kind of collapse of local news, we get that. I don't think that lasts forever, because I think the essence of people needing to know what's going on in their communities so they can like know who they are and what they're up against doesn't go away.
I'm gonna ask this question, but I think I know the answer already, but given the breadth of your experiences, if you were able to go back to when you first got into the business and you could cut some idle time out, perhaps we'll call it that, to create a few more shortcuts to get from here to there to there. We live in a society now where everyone's in a hurry to get from here to there. Would you make any changes?
I think I would pay more attention. And here's what I mean by that. I was like everybody else. I went to a local newspaper and I was trying to get to a bigger one and a bigger one and a bigger one. And all of that happened. But I think the thing I've come to realize, that the thing I love about this work, the thing I get excited about, the thing that I was excited about today, you know, just talking about what it's like to be a reporter in New York City. It's the stories we tell really create community. And if we focus on that, so I would pay more attention to the opportunities I had to do that. And I had lots of them, but I kind of blew through a lot of them early on.
So before we go to the Q&A portion, what do you do to have fun when you're not at work?
I love cities. I love our city. And the way my city love language is kind of walking around in them. I was in Toronto for the first time a couple of weeks ago, and the most exciting thing was being able to just ride the subway 2 stops, because I felt like, oh, I figured this place out. What do I do for fun? I actually like listen to people tell stories that are not consequential to my actual work. I am a huge New York Giants fan. I am a huge Nats fan. Don't. I have a bet that says we're going to win 87 games this year. Okay, now I get to say don't. I'm reading a book called I think it's Chronicles of an Obsessive Rereader by Vivian Gornick. Vivian Gornick used to work at the Village Voice. I think when I was at the Voice, but I was a lowly intern and she was like this legend. I don't know. I'm always kind of seeking out stories and people who can tell stories. That's what I do for fun.
Great. Well, I'm turning the tables on the audience now. Who wants to go first?
Wait, I have one question. What is that story that got you into this business?
Well, I studied anthropology, full disclosure. And I was offered a job at the Smithsonian. And at the time I was at NBC News, at 4001 Nebraska, working in the engineering department. Not exactly the most exciting job. But I was offered a job in the newsroom.
Anthropology.
I grew up on TV news. TV was limited in my household, regimented by my parents, very smartly so. But one thing that we did every night, we watched Walter Cronkite before we had dinner. And my parents grew up on different continents. And the dinner conversation, we'd invariably riff off what Walter Cronkite talked about. It was a steady event in our household. It felt like a natural bridge for me because I was really uncertain about the anthropology. I had studied it. I had done a few archaeological field schools, including pulling up mummies in the Chilean desert. And it was pretty exciting, but pretty gruesome too. But always with lots of respect, because it was, I always wondered about the story. The archaeologist thought about the context. I wondered about the story when we pulled out a mom or a dad or children. How did they live? And I think in part that passion drove me to TV news. I have always wondered about what happened here. And I will add, since I have the floor, my mom is a Holocaust survivor, and I have always had this sense of justice. How could this be? And when I finally got to the newsroom, I realized this, this thing we call, about holding our elected leaders accountable. Washington is a perfect place for that. I had walked into Tim Russerd's newsroom and I was scared because I didn't feel I belonged, and I didn't have the skill set. I came in with an anthropology degree, but guess what? I went in there wide-eyed, thanks to American University and my training and my academic background. And I taught a few of those journalists a couple things along the way about how to see things differently. But it sustained me. It has until this day.
Okay, I'm not going to brag on myself. Did you guys see that answer coming? I know how to ask a question.
A great question. Touche.
Yeah, so this is a multifaceted question, but it's pretty intriguing throughout your explanation of your own story. It reminded me of a quote that someone had told me, and it's like each of us are walking around with a question on our foreheads, and it's saying, make me feel important. Oftentimes in the news, we have situations, we have stories, we have news articles that make us feel unimportant, hopeless, sad, depressed, confused, all of those emotions wrapped up in one. My question is, how does the news make you feel important? How does the news answer that question that each of us are carrying around with us, that's saying, make me feel important today, tomorrow, in the future, whatever that time period may be from your guys' end?
I'm going to say that I'm going to reframe the make me feel important to, what I think everybody wants is to matter and to know that you matter. And the way, it gets described as representation. But I used to say the great thing about a newspaper, if we were doing it right, is that I go back to if you see yourself reflected and your version of life and your concerns, then then you know you matter and that you're part of this community of concern. And I think that's what we try to, that's what I try to do every day. It's like, and it's really hard when we focus on what are the charges and you know, is he going to be handcuffed and all that's important. But it's not the crux of the thing that we're doing, or it shouldn't be. I mean, I don't know how many of you guys were at my first, but the story of the funeral I went to, where I was completely obnoxious and climbed on these people's couch and took their picture off the wall because that was the only picture they had that we could use. And this was a story about a double murder and a family that in the end, I mean, murder, suicide, 75-year-old guy shoots his 90-year-old mother because she's dying, he has cancer, he doesn't know who he's going to take care of. This is his solution. I go to the funeral, I hear one of the sisters say, I know you guys think this is a tragedy, but in some ways it's a love story. And I do all that and I write a story, and one relative says to me later, you know, this was a really hard thing to explain to our family, but we would just send them your story and that made it easier. That's better than, you know, getting the Secretary of Defense to say that the president needs to get out more, which I also got to do.
Hi, I was wondering, just because of how social media sort of caused broadcast and print and digital just sort of kind of converge a little bit, how has that changed your duty and like what a career in journalism looks like?
Well, social media is a tool. Social media requires fact checking. That's something that we do, regardless of what the technical platform is. I think you have to look at it in terms of that context. I think in terms of the community, it gives more people a voice. Sometimes the town square just got a lot bigger with the person in there with a giant megaphone. Context is important. This is why journalism matters. It matters more than ever. And today's Twitter, there will be another, it's tomorrow's Truth Social or some other platform that really doesn't matter where they go and who is on it. The fact checking, the journalism around it, the relevance to your daily lives. And the ultimately, like, what does it mean? The framing from 30,000 feet, you know, how is this important or not? I think all of that is awfully important as we're in this fast-paced life of ours, and technology is just making things faster. And I think the one thing you can do to just help yourself is to just pause, breathe, read, get differing viewpoints, and really follow the journalism that you trust. Everyone's different on that.
Yeah. And look, I mean, when we talk about social media, we're often talking about the problems, especially when we're talking about journalism. But it is a tool. And to the extent that it can be reflective of your community and make you feel seen, make your concerns completely valid, that often doesn't happen in kind of the scorching light of today's news, but there are communities that make you feel where you find your place. And I will say we are figuring that out. Back, there's a, yeah.
I know I get to see over the studio. So, essentially my question is, where do you guys see the place of, journalists, kind of piggybacking off that one, with all this really weird technology, which can, completely make mirror versions of images which look real, how do we make sure that we do fact checking that, people think that what we're saying is real, not that we're also just crazy people making images or whatever.
It's hard. And again, I will resort to we're still figuring it out. But I think at the end of the day, what people are looking for is something real. And while some of this crazy AI stuff is like, oh my God, that looks so real. I mean, you can figure it out. Any Premier League fans here? What team? Okay.
No.
I like that she was a Chelsea fan and she said it out loud. But you've seen the crazy kind of like fake press conferences where like the coaches are just saying things that the fans would like to say. Like and it's entertaining, but it's not true. And I think people will get to a place where they can figure out what's valuable to them and what's not until the next crazy thing comes along. In the meantime, the AI stuff and some of the computer generated stuff is like insane. And we have to pay close attention to the extent that people are intentionally trying to be deceptive, and that it's important, because sometimes they're trying to be deceptive and it's not important. We try to address it.
Hey, thank you, Jeff, for coming. So my question might be a little too specific. But I've pitched a lot of pieces before, and I've gotten some published, but I wrote one that's like very close to my heart. And basically I went to Venezuela and I went to the Venezuelan Amazons, and I got to I was like, well, while I'm at it, I'm going to interview indigenous people here. And we talked about mineral extraction and all these like super cool things. And I talked to like a private pilot, very small community, heavy in tourism though. And I've been like crazy trying to pitch it. So like talked to a professor who's an ambassador, and he was like, yeah, like it's good, but like there's no hook. And then I talked to a friend who's an editor of national interest, kind of similar. He's like, I'll publish it, but I have to change it. We'll have to wait for something cool to happen. And same with, it's been on submittable for like a month now, Foreign Affairs, and I keep asking for updates and they don't update. What do you do about that? Like when you want to write something and you don't want to change it, like, I don't know if you guys have ever had a situation like that.
Well,
Like, I don't know.
be prepared to change it. So I have a question. Anybody here interested in the Amazon? Okay, for the purposes of this, I'm interested in the Amazon. Tell me why I should care.
Well, because the phoniness of Maduro's eco-socialism,
Who's Maduro?
president of Venezuela.
I know.
So he created the Ministry of Eco-Tourism and Eco-Socialism in 2015. And he keeps selling this image to the world that they care about the environment, but there's a $2 trillion investment to extract minerals, and China's behind it. And there's all these like very cool things happening. Everyone talks about Brazil and Congo, but Venezuela is the real thing, like a lot of money there. Talked about it.
Well, number one, yeah, you are the quintessentially frustrated journalist, dealing with the so-called editor and trying to find the right placement for what you believe is a great story. It sounds like a great story. It sounds like, on the framing part, the more you talk about it here, you're gonna find an even better frame for it. About the phoniness of the Maduro ecotourism. I think that's a great hook. So go back to the drawing board on your lead. The fact that you were there makes it a great story because it's the first person account. And that generally does incredibly well. I think you need to find your audience. It's clearly not here. But this isn't the audience you're seeking. But the audience is out there. There's no doubt. I mean, there are lots of people who are passionate about saving the Amazon. So you need to get into that space. And who are the other, you mentioned the role of a mentor. Who are these climate reporters? Who are the top climate reporters? You know, seek them out.
Yes. Who's doing the kind of work that you want to do? And find them. Call them up and ask and offer to buy them coffee.
So I'm a journalism graduate student and I'm about to, prepare to, get a job and stuff after graduation. I want to know, what was your biggest mistake in journalism starting out and what did you learn from it?
Not going to law school. I know exactly what I know exactly what you're asking. You're asking, what should I not do to help me succeed? And in some ways, the mistakes are actually the exact thing you need to do to succeed. I would say, don't figure out the part of this thing that I want to say makes you happy, but makes you feel like you're doing exactly what you need to be doing. It took me a while to figure that out, but it really was the writing part of this thing. Reporting, which I think is the absolute fundamental part of this job, didn't come naturally to me. I was too shy. I didn't think I had the right to ask certain questions. But you heard me describe my kind of experience with the words. And so I went in that direction, but figure out what you like, figure out who's doing what you like, and steal this from them. And don't worry about the mistakes. They're almost as important as the success.
Oh, yeah, so.
You're a Philadelphian.
I am from Philadelphia. So I also grew up in a family where we would watch the news. We watched Lester Holt right before dinner, and then we talked about it at dinner. And the last story of Lester Holt is always like something of hope, like something of optimism. And that's usually when everybody will start getting up and moving and going to get something else started. So my question is, have you seen the emotional role of news change in your time in the industry? And if so, like, there was like a big movement of like people were feeling too emotionally like overwhelmed by all the news, like coming out of COVID or like in the middle of COVID. Do you think that there is going to be a shift back to that, like almost like split 50-50, or do you think it is going to just continue to be more?
Well, I think where there's opportunity, you're going to find news organizations, feeding that. I think for legacy traditional news organizations, 22 minutes of news, and then after all of that, the feel-good story, time for dinner. I think that's a formula. I don't know that that'll change. It would be nice to see more feel-good stories, but there's room for that. There's room for all of it. In fact, at CNN, we have hours and hours of programming. There's plenty of room to cover all of the day's news. I think there's plenty of opportunity. there's plenty of opportunity to connect with the audience in all kinds of ways, including for those who are passionate about the Amazon. In fact, the world is a lot smaller today. We can cover every little nook and cranny based on interest and who's out there doing what in unprecedented ways. Look at the war in Ukraine, the access. Look at natural disasters and how drones have dramatically changed how we see the impact of a natural disaster. In fact, it's brought the audience closer. It's made the audience more engaged. And it's brought a tremendous amount of understanding. I mean, gosh, I mean, I just think about like the impact of a tsunami, right? And I always wondered, like, how does that, but now we have these, God forbid, I mean, it's a horrific event, but so technology plays an important role. But to your point, I think the opportunity is there. And I think that opportunity is fed, right?
Yeah, I think we have to get away from the idea. Implicit in your question is the news is really bad news. And you really don't have much of a choice if you're going to try to tell all the important stories of the day in 22 minutes, or in our case, I mean, we have a better shot at it because we're doing 2 hours of programming and rolling it over. But this is the whole point of these seminars was, if you were doing local news in a local newspaper, there was a lot of room for everything. And a lot of room for the accountability journalism, a lot of room for the thing that happened yesterday, a lot of room for like what was happening in the high school, good or bad, high school sports, lots of stories about what is now being referred to as human flourishing. People just living good, full lives. I did so many of those stories. It was like, I got to be the national correspondent for the Philadelphia Inquirer, living in New York City. And I found a guy living on 94th Street who was from Iran and maybe Iraq. That was a long time ago. And he went to the store, the garden store, with his wife one day. She was not from Iraq. She was from somewhere in Massachusetts. And while he was waiting, he like pulled up this stick, this and stuck it in the ground in his thing. And suddenly there was all these vines and grapes. And the next thing you know, he was making 120 bottles of wine. I had to fight to get it on the front page, but I did. But if you don't have that kind of remit, then you end up with a lot of bad news, and you end up with what people keep talking about now is news fatigue. And we will fix that. And I see Amy saying it's time.
I know we could go on and on, but I think we have to thank our incredible guests today for sharing. Terry, thank you so much for being a part of our fellowship team this semester. Antoine, thank you so much for taking the time and sharing your insights as well. For those of you who might have missed one of Terry's seminars, they were absolutely incredible. We put them up on our YouTube channel at the Sine Institute. There's still an opportunity to see those. Just for a minute, I want to share with you, because the Alumni Association was definitely one of our co-sponsors, I think it'd be interesting to know, and I don't know if you know this, Antoine, also, but there are over 145,000 American University alumni worldwide. That is an incredible networking opportunity. There's an incredible pool of mentors and people who want to help fellow Eagles and fellow alumni. So we should take advantage of that, and by being part of this special supportive group. So for current students, you can connect with alumni through programs such as Dinner with Alumni, which is in the summer and in February. You can join the Student Alumni Association, Alumni Fire is the communication platform for AU students and alumni to keep in touch. If you're going to be an alumni, soon to be an alumni, staying in DC, you can join the DC Young Alumni chapter. It's an incredibly active, great place to go to meet peers and you know, I think sometimes mentorship is also peer-to-peer, and that's a really great opportunity to do that. If you're leaving the area, there are alumni communities across the country, and the alumni department is ready and willing to connect you and help you with that. Get involved with one of the many alumni affinity groups and networks. There's so many ways to connect, and stay connected through Alumni Fire, the LinkedIn alumni group. And then certainly we have information. Lisa's here from the alumni team sharing information with you. Please stop by, or you can reach out to alumni@american.edu. There's other career conversations coming up. I think you can also glean from fellows who might be in different sectors or you know, working in different areas as well. We welcome you to come to those. Thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you at
Amy.
other events.
Can I answer her question about mistakes?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Don't be shy. Call people.
That's a good idea.
It's actually great to meet you. Thank you too. It's a pleasure.
Great questions, you guys.
No worries.
Thank you guys so much. I know.